Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Nightfall Terrors. I know many of you enjoy using these videos to help you fall asleep, so before you start to drift off, it would be great if you could leave a comment sharing where you're listening from around the world. If you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to like and subscribe as well. Now, let's get cozy, settle in, and begin. One of our rescue goats disappeared recently, and I still can't fully explain what I found when I went searching for him. The first time I watched a goat eat, it startled me. Don't get me wrong, I love them, but they really are relentless. They eat everything they can reach. I know it's part of survival, something every species is wired for. Still, I believe some creatures seem to have a deeper hunger, something different. It never crossed my mind that I'd end up forming opinions about goat diets, and I certainly didn't expect to find myself living in the South. Deep South, in fact. Right in that muggy stretch of Alabama that sits above the Florida Panhandle. But Corey, my ex, grew up here. After he was let go from his third job, he got it in his head that we should move back. Before I met Corey, I'd barely ventured outside of New York City, except maybe for outlet shopping, brunch in Jersey, or an occasional weekend at the beach. I had never crossed the Mason-Dixon line, but Corey, with his sun-bleached hair and a southern drawl that could stretch a word to its limits, made the unlikely sound idyllic. We eventually settled in his quiet hometown along the Alabama River, where Friday night football and county fairs were the highlights of the year. Adjusting was a challenge. I missed the city, the sense of being unknown, the ambient buzz of people living on top of one another, the comforting silence of public transport and elevators filled with strangers. Corey, on the other hand, eased back into southern life like slipping into an old pair of jeans. That included rekindling things with his high school girlfriend, Leanne, who's still with him now. They moved away after she had their baby. Our marriage didn't last, but I came to appreciate the rugged charm of rural Alabama. So did our son, Brett, who adapted to it with the same ease as his dad. That played a major part in my decision to stay. When Corey and I split up, I got the house, a big, aging fixer-upper, and the land around it. 5 acres. Something I couldn't have imagined back in my city life. I had no clue what to do with it. But Brett did. He turned it into his personal project playground, full of wild ideas only a kid on a farm could dream up. And then, before I knew it, he'd grown up and moved on. No more chasing fireflies or brewing mud potions in old buckets. He left for college last fall. Roll Tide is now his catchphrase whenever he's home. With him gone, the place felt quiet. Too quiet. So I got goats. You might wonder, why goats? Why not travel or move back to the city? That's not a simple answer. It's tangled up in the kind of deep reflection that creeps in when you realize you're halfway through life and not entirely sure how you got there. Approaching 40, alone for the first time in decades, in a place that still didn't quite feel like mine. I needed something or someone to care for, something unpredictable. The goats became that something. They gave me a new purpose, a daily reason to get outside and keep going. People here have a saying, life comes at you fast, and you better keep up. It sounds cliche, but the truth in it grows on you. Also, there was the kudzu. Kudzu is a plant I never expected to learn much about. It's called the vine that ate the South. When I first arrived, I thought it looked magical, like something from a fantasy story. Green veils draping barns and telephone poles. I had no idea what it actually was. Back during the Great Depression, the South had a serious erosion problem. Generations of bad farming had left the soil in bad shape. Kudzu, a fast-growing vine from Japan, was brought in to help. It was great at stabilizing soil, so they planted it by the thousands of acres. At first, it worked. By the 1940s, it was marketed as a miracle plant. Pretty, edible, versatile. The government even paid farmers to plant it. Small farmers couldn't say no, so kudzu spread until it covered millions of acres. It overtook trees, fences, buildings, roads. What started as a solution became a disaster. Kudzu's strengths, rapid growth, hardiness, also made it nearly impossible to stop. By the 1990s, the government labeled it a noxious weed and tried to eliminate it. That battle is still going on today, despite all our science. We still can't kill it off completely. Its roots run deep, up to 12 feet, and any fragment of root left behind can grow a new vine. It thrives in heat and humidity and barely needs nutrients, just sunlight, and it always finds sunlight. People call it mile-a-minute vine because it spreads so fast. Blink, and it's across the yard, climbing trees, swallowing structures. There are even jokes about shutting children's windows at night, so kudzu doesn't sneak in and take them too. Down here, you learn to live with it. Kudzu is part of the landscape now, but you've got to stay ahead of it. If you're too slow, it takes over. Our property was one of many that planted kudzu in the early 20th century. It was everywhere, wrapping around the land like a green tide. Corey used to fight it back. That was pretty much the only thing he kept up with. After he left, it surged forward, creeping closer to the house. Brett and I used to make a game out of cutting it down, but the novelty faded, and eventually it got overwhelming. Here's where goats come in. Fun fact, they love kudzu. It's like spinach to them, high protein and delicious. And I was craving a new project. One Saturday, I wandered through the local farmer's market, not really shopping, just killing time, and came across a booth covered in goat photos. They were up for adoption. The woman running it, Marjorie, had thick glasses and silver hair tied back in a messy bun. She spoke to me like I was a neighbor, not a newcomer. She hated her neighbor's commercial goat farm, and by the end of our long chat, she had convinced me to agree. The more we talked, the more the idea took shape. Goats love kudzu, and I had more than enough of it. It was almost too perfect. I left with no groceries, but her business card and a plan forming in my mind. I've been lucky to work remotely all these years. Same graphic design firm that hired me out of college, 2 decades in, and I've earned a bit of flexibility. So, between projects, I dove into research. I read about goat diets, behavior, shelter, health needs. Everything I'd need to know to start a herd. With a mix of excitement and what I told myself was careful planning, I called Marjorie. Start small, she said. Try a few and see how it goes. So, I did. I adopted 3, Edgar, Poe, and Virginia, nicknamed the Three Stooges. Then came Alan, rescued after a flood. Then Raven, whose owners couldn't cover her vet bills. And so on. If someone had told me years ago I'd be tending goats instead of designing brochures, I'd have laughed. I was always a city girl. The early days were chaotic. Goats have strong personalities. Think toddlers on hooves, curious, unruly, and capable of incredible destruction. They chewed drywall, turned my favorite tree into a stick. Marjorie's warnings echoed in my mind like background music. The day I found Raven on my car roof, nibbling on the wipers, I genuinely questioned my decisions. Was it insane? Maybe, but once I started caring for them, I realized how much it mattered to me. Once I had that sense of purpose again, I couldn't let it go. The goatscaping business, if you can even call it that in the beginning, started more by chance than planning. I had been sharing my goat adventures online, partly to keep faraway friends in the loop, partly to vent. Photos, videos, before and after shots, proof of how much these goats could eat. Then something surprising happened. People didn't just find it funny. They were genuinely interested in hiring the goats to deal with their own yard issues. I realized I needed a way to manage the attention and turn my growing goat obsession into something sustainable. The logo came together quickly. A cartoon goat with wide eyes, chewing a vine that spelled out gem. The E was shaped like an emerald. It was goofy, slightly chaotic, just like the goats. I texted it to Marjorie. She nearly died laughing. And that's how gem, goats eating mile a minute, came to be. Once the logo was stamped on all my old farm gear, I leaned into my background in advertising. Got weeds. Rent a gem. Nothing's faster than goats eating mile a minute. Yeah, it was cheesy. But around here, that plays well. Orders started slow but then picked up. Local farmers, city staff, eco-friendly newcomers. As demand grew, I brought in Marjorie. Then we built a co-op model, working with other local goat rescues to share resources and rotate jobs. We weren't the biggest operation, but we found our place, focusing on smaller farms and businesses and running as a non-profit. Every bit we earned went into animal care and rehab efforts. It wasn't easy work, but most days I'd still call it rewarding. After years of feeling like an outsider, I had finally found a place that felt like mine. Then came the call from Marjorie. Blue Phillip was missing. Her exact words were, "The big asshole's not back with the big asshole yet." I knew who she meant. The first asshole was Harris Rainier, a new volunteer and cousin to one of our longtime members, Jacob. Jacob had vouched for him. Harris had already made a name for himself, a bit too polished, always with a faint smile you couldn't quite trust. Tall, good-looking in a plain way, always in faded jeans and hoodies, pulled up like he wanted to disappear. People whispered, maybe drugs, maybe a sketchy past, always with that suggestive look that left the rest to the imagination. He reminded me a lot of Corey, hence the nickname. The other asshole was Blue Phillip, a massive goat buck, easily over 300 pounds. When he first arrived at Marjorie's, he was called Goliath. Brett renamed him after the goat from the V-Vitch because of the resemblance. Blue Phillip had a blue-gray coat and a nasty attitude to match. Among the volunteers, he was a legend, stubborn, powerful, and not for beginners. But new volunteers often thought they could handle him, usually against advice. It was no surprise when I learned he and Harris had gone out without backup. When were they due back? I asked. 4 hours ago, Marjorie replied, clearly annoyed. Jobs running long wasn't rare. Goats don't follow a plan. They eat, they climb, they escape, and they do it all with relentless energy. Managing them is like chasing chaos on 4 legs. But something about this felt different, off. Did you talk to the client? I asked. Yeah, she said, voice sharp. He bailed halfway through the job, left the herd there. I had to go get them myself. I winced. Technically, it wasn't my fault, but I still felt responsible, like I'd failed her and failed Jem. No word from Harris, I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Nothing, she said. I've been calling everyone, every place they might have gone. It's like they vanished. Who was he supposed to go out with? Take a guess, she said, dragging out the words. I pressed a hand to my forehead. A headache was already forming. I'll take care of it, I told her. My voice stayed steady, but inside, I was tense. After hanging up, I stared at my reflection in the dark screen of my phone, worried. My next call was to Jacob. He picked up quickly, concern obvious in his voice. What happened? He asked. I explained the situation, doing my best to stay calm. There was a long pause on the other end, followed by a quiet curse. Shit, he muttered. All right, don't do anything yet. I'll try to handle it. To his credit, he really did try. 8 of us from Jem searched the area. We checked all of Blue Phillip's usual hiding spots and all the places Harris was known to hang out. Bars, clubs, and the odd back roads between them. As the hours passed, hope faded. We knew we were going through the motions. Eventually, Jacob and I found ourselves under the buzzing lights of the police station, filling out missing person reports. 1 for man, 1 for goat. A week passed, then another. We kept searching, sent out alerts to other rescues, posted on social media. After a few months, we had to accept reality. Maybe Harris had run off with Blue Phillip. Maybe it was something worse. I didn't like to think about the worse, especially not in an area where people did some awful things to goats. Jacob stepped away from Jem after that. He still came to events sometimes, and we gave his family a donation to help with the search, though I had to twist Marjorie's arm for it. I hope the goat kicked him in the head, she said. I couldn't disagree. Life moved on. Marjorie and I tightened up our volunteer process. We created an online form to screen new jobs. It asked for basic property details, size, location, types of plants, anything special to consider. It helped us plan better and kept records of who went where and with which goats. We stopped relying on trust alone. I took on more jobs myself, not because I didn't trust the team, but because that lingering guilt wouldn't let go. A while back, I almost brought Blue Phillip into my own backyard herd. Brett had really taken to him, but I had decided it was too much. Didn't want to be the crazy goat lady, a phrase I'd once overheard Corey say to Brett. Silly, maybe, but I still wondered how things might have turned out if I'd listened to my gut. That morning started like any other job day. I was up early, running on coffee and a corn muffin, reminding myself that I hadn't smoked in 4 years. Not since I caught Brett sneaking one of mine. The job was way out in the woods, rural even for Alabama. I packed a paper map just in case the GPS failed, which turned out to be a good call. The client said they'd set up fencing themselves, which saved time, but I brought a backup setup just to be safe. I loaded up the goats, just my original 3. It was a small job, just kudzu control. My old blue Toyota, still holding on, looked almost proud, with the bright gem logo standing out on the weathered paint. The deeper I drove, the weaker the cell signal got. Before long, it vanished completely. The road narrowed, Homes disappeared, and it was just me, the low bleats of the goats, and endless fields stretching into the horizon. Eventually, I turned onto a gravel road that barely looked like one. It was more a path than anything, bordered by ancient oaks that had likely stood through the Civil War. The trees closed in, shadows growing longer, the summer heat warping the air around them. And that's when things started to feel off, and then, just like spotting the ocean on the way to the beach, I saw it. By now you probably know I've spent plenty of time around kudzu. I've practically turned it into a part-time study. But this was something else entirely. It was the worst kudzu outbreak I had ever encountered. A relentless sea of green that had swallowed the forest whole, transforming it into something surreal. The vines were enormous, some as thick as my arms, twisting and knotting into a pattern so dense it almost looked crafted, like a woven trap laid across the landscape. If forests could wear blindfolds, this was one, I thought, feeling a strange chill at the base of my neck that had nothing to do with the old truck's struggling AC. At first, it looked like a hill sat at the end of the drive. I turned off the engine and stared, trying to make sense of it, until I realized it was the outline of a building, a house entirely swallowed by kudzu. Vines blanketed every inch, cascading in tangled layers. The silence was thick, the sort that presses on your ears. I couldn't imagine anyone still living here. The job description had mentioned overgrowth. I laughed to myself, disbelieving. This wasn't overgrowth. This was a takeover. Nature had reclaimed it all. I didn't want to get out of the truck, but I did. The air outside was heavy, filled with the pungent scent of raw vegetation, like breathing in a juiced-up lawn. I called out a cautious, "Hello?" half expecting silence, half dreading a reply. At first, there was nothing. Then, a soft creak. The vines shifted slightly. For a second, I imagined the kudzu itself was alive, watching me, aware of my presence. But it was just a man. He stepped out from what must have been a door, stooped and slow. His clothes were stained with the same deep green as the walls of vines. His white hair stuck out beneath an old baseball cap, tinted faintly green like everything else. He motioned for me to come closer. I hesitated, then stepped forward across what had once been stairs, now buried in leaves. "You the goat lady, I'm guessing?" he asked in a rough voice. I nodded, unsure what else to do, the situation bordering on surreal. A woman with a truck of goats trying to reclaim a home from kudzu. This house wasn't getting reclaimed. It was being eaten alive. "Well, you got your work cut out for you," he said, flashing a wide, gapped grin through his overgrown beard. I didn't respond, just stood there, trying to absorb it all. Through the open door behind him, I could feel the dense, wet heat rolling out like a greenhouse, sweet, musty, overgrown. The windows, now yellowed and hidden behind vines, cast only darkness inside. I felt a strong urge to back away. His eyes caught my attention then, a strange reddish color, surprisingly clear and alert. "Randy," he said, holding out a dirty hand. I shook it instinctively, silently wishing I'd worn gloves. I didn't offer my name. Something about this felt off. My gut was uneasy. No cell signal. Usually that wasn't a problem. Everyone at Jam knew my location, and it's rare that any real trouble starts with a goat rental. But this place had a different feel. My instincts told me to leave. I opened my mouth to make an excuse, but Randy cut in. You know, we tried to call your gem folks a while back. Maybe 3-4 months ago, he said. I glanced around again. Even if they had, 6 months wouldn't have made a dent in this. Thought it was a scam, maybe. Internet's tough to figure out at my age. Talked to some fella. Said he had a big blue goat, like Paul Bunyan and Babe the Blue Ox. Wild stuff. A blue goat. My stomach tightened. Was his name Harris? I asked, pulse quickening. Could be. Can't say for sure, he replied, dragging a hand down his cheek, streaking brown across the green. Never came by anyway. So I'm glad you made it. Could Harris have tried freelancing with Blue Phillip? Did the police ever get in touch with you? I asked. His eyebrows lifted in surprise, then drew into a frown. About what? About Harris and the blue goat, I said carefully. What would the cops have to do with that? He asked, not defensive, just puzzled. He was one of our volunteers. He's been missing for months, I explained. He steals something from you? He asked, his expression shifting to what looked like sympathy. Too much of it? No. At first, nothing seemed stolen. But then I thought of Blue Phillip. Actually, yes. Well, that's a shame, he said. But like I said, he never came out here. His face was unreadable now, and he scratched his beard. Twigs caught in the hairs. Right. I wasn't convinced. My brain spun. Was he lying? Was Harris trying to sell him the goat? Was this about drugs? Should I just get back in the truck and leave? Before I could decide, a loud chorus of bleats erupted from the trailer. They sound hungry, Randy said, peering over my shoulder. Yeah, they usually are, I replied. Well, they won't run out of food here, he said, grinning again. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe he really was just a man trying to fight back against a green tide. Where do you want them? I asked, annoyed with myself for not walking away sooner. Got a spot cleared out in the back, he said, gesturing behind the house. I looked, though the house had no clear back or front, really. I jammed my hands in my pockets, weighing the situation. I could have left and brought the police back, but would they drive all the way out here just for a hunch? Jacob had told me the investigation had stalled. Harris had used burner phones. There was no trail. Maybe I'd find something myself. I took one last look around the vine-choked woods, checking for movement. All right, I said, frustrated with my own curiosity. Randy turned and disappeared into the foliage. I thought he might be inviting me in, which I wouldn't have agreed to. But then I heard a creaky door open somewhere behind the house. I headed to the trailer. Edgar, Bo, and Virginia bounded out, hooves clattering down the ramp. Excited and restless, I led them through the kudzu, cutting through the thick air. They didn't hesitate, just started eating. Watching them spread out, I almost laughed. No hesitation, no questions. Just straight to work. Look at him go. Randy cheered from behind the vines, clapping his leg like he was calling a dog. You've got us till 5, but I glanced at the endless kudzu. What are we really aiming to do here? Just want to clear out a little spot. Hammock, maybe a couple benches, he replied. Another grin. I didn't buy it, not even close. A chill ran down my spine again. I scanned the forest, where trees were choking beneath the vines. Well, we've got time. Randy made a loud smacking sound with his mouth, chewing on something. Maybe tobacco, though I didn't see any. No place to sit yet. "But you're welcome to come inside," he said, like it was a casual offer, that overly polite tone that could mean anything. "No," I answered firmly, nodding toward the goats. "Need to keep an eye on them." "I'll bring you something then. Fresh sun tea," he said, chuckling as he pushed through the vines. Shifted my boots on the soft kudzu. This might be my only chance. I surveyed the enclosed area. Randy had done a surprisingly good job, considering how little he seemed to move. The layout reminded me of our own fencing. I ran my fingers along the top wire as I walked slowly, scanning the forest beyond. Not that I could see much, just layer upon layer of leaves. The goats kept chewing, the sound oddly echoing across the space, making it feel like the entire pen was filled with the noise. Then, like spotting a crack in pavement, I saw a thin break in the leaves, a faint glimpse of navy. A sweatshirt was snagged on a branch far off. My fingers tightened around the fence. Randy didn't strike me as the hoodie type. Harris, though. I didn't know him well, but I remembered his clothes. If I brought that sweatshirt to the police, told them where I found it. I looked back toward the house. Nothing moved but the vines. How long did I have before he came back outside? If I left it and he realized what I saw, he'd just make it disappear. "Is this dumb?" I asked Edgar. The goat met my eyes with his flat, square pupils, glowing orange and unblinking. I took it as a yes. "Just a quick look," I said, mostly to convince myself. In and out. I inhaled deeply and jumped the short fence. My boots sank into soft soil, quickly hidden beneath a curtain of kudzu. I pushed through the dense green. Crossing into the tree line felt like stepping into the stomach of a creature. The vines were thick, like coiled snakes gripping the trees. It was eerily quiet, the silence only broken by the faint rustle of leaves, dulled by the sheer amount of greenery. Overhead, only slivers of sky peeked through tangled branches and foliage. Below, the ground was covered entirely in kudzu, hiding the forest floor and making each step uncertain. Sometimes, I hit solid ground. Other times, I sank into soft rot below. Each step forward was a negotiation, ducking, pushing vines aside, stopping to choose the least blocked path. The sweatshirt was farther than it looked, like a mirage. But I reached it at last, clutching it tightly like a child's comfort toy. I had no plans to go any deeper, but when I turned back, the path I came from had vanished, closed in by kudzu. It was like I'd never come in at all. All familiar markers were gone, consumed by green. No way back. I turned in slow circles, searching for any sign of where I started. Footprints, broken branches, anything. But every direction looked the same. Glowing, endless green. Time slipped away. I only noticed it by the slow shift in light, from warm gold to a pale, moonlit blue. As I pressed further in, the kudzu changed. It gleamed, brighter and greener than before, and its flowers were huge, more vivid and fragrant than any I'd seen, flooding the air with a scent like red wine. A strange shimmer rippled through them, like soap bubbles just before they pop. It pulsed through the plant's veins, phosphorescent and strange. I touched one. The petals had tiny hairs, soft like peach fuzz. Too soft, almost like skin, bruised skin. It was unreal, disturbingly beautiful, the kind of thing that spells danger in science fiction stories. The flowers and vines were everywhere, but I had to keep moving. As I grew more exhausted, the kudzu seemed to shift unnaturally, swaying in ways that didn't match the wind. It was confusing, like the whole forest was breathing. I kept checking my phone, mostly out of habit, trying to stay calm. No signal. With a shaky laugh, I thought I should have left a trail. Breadcrumbs, yarn, anything. Eventually, I stumbled into a clearing. I gasped for breath, gripping the sweatshirt before finally dropping it. Evidence didn't matter anymore. My shirt clung to me, soaked in sweat. I spun left, then right. Too many options, all identical. A crossroads, I thought, the kind where something bad waits. Then I heard a noise, deliberate and slow. I spun around, heart pounding. From the dense kudzu, a shadow stepped forward. At first, it seemed like a trick of the light, maybe just oddly shaped vines. But it moved, limbs bending with the creak of wood. Eyes met mine, dark voids glimmering with the same shimmer as the flowers. And then, under the flickering light, I saw something that made my breath catch. Harris. My voice cracked, barely audible. As the figure stepped closer, the face shifted, vines coiling around it, reshaping it. The resemblance faded in and out. Sometimes Harris, sometimes not. A grotesque blend of man and plant. It didn't speak, just tilted its head, curious. Iridescent veins pulsed beneath the skin like vines. Then it raised a hand, gloved like all the gem volunteers, but torn, with bone showing through the holes. Tendrils leaked out, piercing the leather and skin, dripping with jewel-toned fluid. A mouth, barely a slit, opened with a hiss, thin and piercing like nails on glass. There were no words, but I felt the message clearly. Stay. The word echoed in my mind, steady and heavy. For a moment, it was all I could think of. To lie down on the soft kudzu, let it take me, forget everything, to be absorbed piece by piece until I was nothing but part of the vines. They stirred at my feet slowly, then with purpose, wrapping toward my ankles. Their whispers invited me into oblivion. Then, something rustled nearby. I flinched, thinking it was the end. But it was Blue Philip. He looked awful, ribs showing, gray coat patchy, horns tangled in vines like some twisted crown. The vines tugged them down, keeping his head bowed, feeding off him. I stepped back. The creature, Harris, or what used to be, hesitated as if surprised. The vines paused, waiting for me to give in, but I didn't. With a surge of desperation, I lunged at the vines around Blue Philip's horns, pulling again and again until they loosened. The effect was instant. Everything around us faltered. Philip shook violently, then reared back and charged the vines. The impact was deafening. Green tendrils tore, thick sap splattered. The creature staggered, limbs flailing as if stunned. As the vines slid back from my feet, I grabbed Philip's collar and we ran. Fear and adrenaline pushed us forward, crashing through the underbrush, vines writhing behind us. Then, suddenly, we were free. I stumbled into the clearing, gasping like I'd surfaced from deep water. I tripped through the fencing. Blue Philip barreled through after me, breaking it apart. The other goats were lying calmly, lifting their heads with sleepy bleats. The old man, and whatever he was with, was gone. But I didn't trust the shadows. My hands shook as I herded the goats to the truck. and drove out of there as fast as I could. My first stop was the police. It took hours to reach town. By the time I arrived, I was caked in mud, hair tangled with brambles, and reeking of goat. I must have looked completely unhinged, though I didn't care. They did go to investigate, but by then, the place was empty. Maybe it always was. Either Randy was squatting in a long-abandoned house, or, if you ask the officers, it was all in my head. No sweatshirt, no trace of Harris. But they did note the fencing matched what Jem used. Kutsu was everywhere, but as one officer joked, none of the walking, talking kind. I don't know what parts were real anymore, except for one thing. The mason jar I found in my truck, filled with dark red liquid, kutsu flower sun tea. It still sits on my kitchen windowsill. Marjorie told me I should dump it. Burn sage. I'm not sure why I haven't. Blue Phillips fully recovered now, back with the rest of the goats. His horns still bear twisted scars, barbed wire, they say. No one can explain why he was so emaciated, or why he didn't eat the kutsu. I told Brett. He looked skeptical but concerned. He stayed a few days. I don't know, Ma, he said. I guess everything evolves. That line stuck with me long after he left. Now, sometimes, I dream vines slipping from the forest, crawling across my porch, into the house, up the stairs, into my bed. Beautiful, frightening, starving, shifting, inching forward, bit by bit. The artist. There's a painting my wife loves, Death and Life by Gustav Klimt. I've never fully understood what captivates her about it. Back when we first started dating, I played along, nodding and offering half-formed commentary on color contrasts and artistic angles. She was an artist, and our early dates were long walks through galleries, starting with Picasso's Blue Period and ending with flirtation that went nowhere, at least initially. I had taken a single art history elective while finishing my doctorate. It gave me just enough vocabulary to impress my stunning future wife and convince her to spend time in my shockingly messy apartment. Think Bachelor Frog on a lily pad of takeout boxes, surrounded by a pond of laundry that could have kept a laundromat afloat for months. I remember the scramble to find 2 wine-worthy containers while she was in the bathroom. I rinsed coffee mugs, ran to hide some old condom wrappers on my nightstand, and returned to find her clothes laid out on the bed like some sacred offering. She stepped out of the bathroom completely nude except for high heels, grabbed the wine bottle, and took a swig straight from it. That was the moment I knew I was absolutely unchangeably in love. I don't have an eye for visual art. I work in finance. My creativity comes through numbers, but I genuinely admire her work. Over the years, she's built a strong reputation. Critics call her the American Damien Hirst. One of her early exhibits featured oil paintings of rotting pastries, all encircling a real cake infested with the dead ladybugs, being eaten by a mummified tarantula dressed as Little Miss Muffet. I never got what it was supposed to mean, but it was a hit catered by Balthazar, and I ate more than my share of croissants. Bug-free, thankfully. She was magnetic. She had the body of a dancer, the elegance of a Modigliani muse, and she still does. Charming, engaging, complex, the kind of person everyone gravitates toward. She had a wicked sense of humor and a bedroom intensity that left little doubt. As soon as my income hit a level, that could support a lifestyle she deserved, I proposed. I bought her a historic brownstone in the city, complete with rose gardens and original mahogany floors. For a while, it felt like a dream. We were the couple you love to hate in lifestyle magazines. But like any marriage, ours hit turbulence. She still looked like the same woman I'd fallen for. Guests constantly asked when she'd host the next dinner, and she never lost her artistic eye, but I could tell she wasn't happy. You could see it in the edges of her smile, in the distant look in her eyes. It began subtly. She brought home several shower curtains from a boutique and asked me to help choose one. We settled on a pale blue one, impractical and overpriced, but it made her smile. Days passed, then weeks, and I noticed she hadn't put it up. Eventually, I found it shredded and dyed beyond recognition, hanging in her studio. I said nothing. Over time, I'd learned that questioning an artist's process could spark more trouble than it's worth. But a year later, I couldn't ignore the signs. She became tightly wound, tense in a way that felt unsafe. Typically, she held an exhibition every few months, often having to trim down her ideas. But an entire year went by without a single completed piece. I started worrying about her mental health and our finances. Our lifestyle relied on those $20,000 shows to keep up with beach vacations and Aspen ski trips. Then she burned the roses. She had completed work, dozens of pieces it turned out, but hated them all. She either destroyed or painted over them. Then, one afternoon, while I was at work, she snapped. She doused around 16 canvases in lighter fluid and torched the garden. When the fire department called, I rushed home to find her sitting in an ambulance covered in ash, cigarette in hand, her blonde hair singed. I looked at the charred remains, the blackened roses, ruined sculptures, scorched canvases, and asked what happened. She took a drag and simply said, "It was mine to burn." She photographed the entire blaze. A family of rabbits had died in the smoke. She had them stuffed and arranged by size on a papier-mâché volcano. She salvaged some of the scorched debris and crafted a twisted phoenix-like sculpture, massive and haunting. She titled it "From the Ashes." The New York Times called it incendiary. Her emergence as a true artist. Someone bought it. I still pity whoever wakes up every day to that grotesque monument to emotional collapse. Later, in a Dante's Inferno-themed bar in San Francisco, drunk and immersed in morbid jokes about her show and the bar's hellish decor, I finally asked what was really going on. At first, she deflected, saying the exhibit was the most profitable yet, that it had paid for our trip. I kept quiet. Then she paused. Her eyes glistened. She took a shot of whiskey from a glass shaped like a bull's head and said, almost offhandedly, "Well, for starters, I'm pretty sure I'm pregnant." She let the glass drop. It shattered. She slid off the stool and stumbled out. I stayed, stunned, drinking and reeling. I thought about the look she had when she first showed me the Klimt painting. How she used to wear glasses. How she'd smile as I spouted nonsense about warm and cool colors and angular composition. While she stayed behind in San Francisco, I turned her studio into a nursery. I hired a landscaper to replant the roses. I worked overtime, read parenting, books, drank too much. When she came back, she was nearly full term. I found sonogram images of twin girls taped to the fridge. She was asleep on our bed, belly huge, smelling faintly of weed and solvents. Her fingers were stained with paint. She'd been busy. The canary yellow walls I'd painted were now coated with translucent blue. One wall was transformed with Klimt-style motifs. Paint flecks covered the plush carpet. A vase on the changing table overflowed with roses, petals scattered throughout the room. It was chaotic and stunning. The next few years brought calm. We bonded over parenting, despite her unconventional pregnancy habits. The girls were bright, beautiful, and entirely her. Same blonde curls, same blue eyes. At times, I wondered if I had contributed at all genetically. They felt like tiny copies of her. She started therapy, tried some medication. Eventually, her psychiatrist decided it had been a hormonal crisis. Life returned to a version of normal. She stopped painting and began teaching art at a university. She even seemed more content than before. Occasionally, I'd catch a flash in her eyes, the kind that hinted at buried volatility, but it always passed quickly, her gaze softening again into that familiar blue. I climbed higher at work. I loved the control, the success. I loved my daughters, and I loved her, my brilliant, chaotic, maddening, passionate, extraordinary wife. And then, today happened. Today I came home early. Today my wife volunteered as a chaperone for a class trip to the Met. The school had been asking her for months, eager to take advantage of her background in the art world. They wanted the children to experience culture in the most refined way possible. I thought it was a little absurd. The group consisted of toddlers in a private daycare. These kids were more likely to find wonder in a Cheerio than in Monet's water lilies. Still, they eventually convinced her, and she was handed a group of toddlers and enthusiastic teachers to lead through the museum. I came home around lunchtime because I had forgotten my iPad, which held notes for a presentation I was giving later that evening. As I passed through the rose garden, I noticed a small piece of sculpture left over from her ashes exhibit years ago. It looked like half of a tiny bird, intricately crafted, the kind of precise detail that once defined her best-known work. I suspected it might have been a real bird, cast in clay. One of the cracks even seemed to contain a piece of feather. I wondered how I hadn't noticed it before. Inside, I poured a glass of orange juice. The fridge was covered in drawings from our daughters, happy stick figures, uneven and cheerful. They were nothing like the unsettling art their mother used to create, and I was glad for that. I hoped they'd take after me and grow up loving numbers. The house was completely silent. I sat with the juice, enjoying the quiet. Then I noticed a faint smell. Fresh paint. Curious, I walked into the living room. My wife was on the leather couch, holding a bottle of wine, looking almost otherworldly. She was painted from head to toe in a grayish blue, with darker shading under her eyes. She wore a revealing patchwork dress, covered in crosses of all shapes. Except it wasn't a dress. I realized it was the old shower curtain, the one from years ago, torn and repurposed. Her body was still flawless, her chest, her waist. The wine bottle in her hand had been painted an odd shade of orange. The smell of paint was stronger here, mixed with lighter fluid and something else I couldn't quite identify. Her head was shaved. I just stared. Was it for minutes? Maybe an hour. She eventually lifted the bottle, took a long sip, and swirled the wine in her mouth. Her fingers were stained with layers of blue and deep red paint. I sat down in the armchair across from her, unsure of what to say, or even what I wanted to ask. Maybe I already knew. Maybe I didn't want a confirmation. On the table between us was a camera. As I reached for it, she gently placed her hand on mine, painted, familiar, soft, with the ease of long marriage. Then she spoke. Her lips, pale beneath the paint, moved slowly. They were mine, and now I'm still sitting here. I know what's behind the door to my daughter's room, the one with the Klimt-inspired wall we never painted over. I understand now why the school has been calling, why the NYPD is trying to reach me, why my sleeping pills were missing last night, what the smell in the air truly is. I can see out of the corner of my eye the red seeping into the carpet from under their door, the neatly folded clothes beside her on the couch. I can picture the thick wire she always used in her installations to arrange everything just right, because she was always so precise. In my mind, I see the phoenix again, and I hope that when she lights that cigarette she's holding, we both go up in flames. I found a dog in my yard with a camera on its collar, and the footage makes no sense. I'm not much of an animal person, or a people person, for that matter. My daily life could be summed up as a near repeat of my favorite routine. A tidy room, a comfortable chair, a good novel, a quality glass of scotch, and some vintage rock playing from my grandfather's old vinyl records. People often call me dull, and my sisters love to tease me about it. But this is the life I enjoy. I wake up when my body decides it's time. No alarm clocks, no schedules. I get out of bed, head to the kitchen, and make my coffee in a French press that's always waiting on the counter. Breakfast follows, and I watch the sunrise while sipping. My home is small and tucked away in a quiet suburb, decorated in a style I love. 1970s mid-century revival, with clean lines, tapered furniture, and geometric prints. I work remotely as a data consultant, analyzing numbers for clients who likely don't even know my name, just the spreadsheets I deliver. The job fits me well. Minimal human contact, lots of alone time. It can be monotonous, but it pays well. I find comfort in numbers, spotting patterns. It's like working through a puzzle, and puzzles have always fascinated me. On the rare days I'm feeling adventurous, I'll play music while I work or smoke a bit of weed. After lunch, I usually go for a run, shower, then get back to work until I've made decent progress. My evenings end with dinner, a film, a book, or both if it's a weekend. I might see an old friend or talk to one of my sisters, but that only happens every few months. Honestly, solitude feels like the safest place for me. My mom passed when I was still in high school, and after that my dad, well, let's just say he wasn't exactly a role model. I spent those years trying to keep things together. My college roommate turned out to be just as chaotic, so now I stick to a peaceful, predictable routine. No loud fights, no coming home to drama, no chaos I didn't sign up for. It was during one of these typical quiet nights that I noticed the dog. I was in my usual spot, my favorite chair, half asleep, trying to finish a chapter of I Am Legend. At first I thought I was imagining it. Maybe my brain was drifting and had started blending fiction with reality. After all, that book does feature a dog. But when I looked out the window again, wide awake now, I knew it was real. There, right in the middle of my backyard, sat a muddy, scruffy dog. It was staring straight at me through the window. Its tail wagged in this this hopelessly eager way that somehow got me to throw on my slippers and head downstairs before I even realized what I was doing. The strange part was how it got there. My yard is sealed off with an 8-foot wooden fence. No gaps, no weak points. I live in rural Colorado, and the fence was professionally installed by a company that usually works on ranches. My neighbors even call it a fortress. So how this dog made it in, that alone had my attention. Like I said, puzzles grab me. Always have. My sisters joke that I'm like one of those mythical creatures that get stuck solving riddles if you throw one my way. I walked into the kitchen. It was quiet, bathed in moonlight, with only the fridge humming. I turned on the porch light, casting a warm glow across the deck and path leading into the yard. I stared into the dark, scanning the yard. The dog was big, much larger than the average suburban dog. Its coat was matted, gray, and soaked in mud, like a toy left outside too long. My first guess was it might be a farm dog that had wandered off. Then I saw it, something around its neck. At first, it just looked like a clump of fur or a tangled mass. But when the dog shifted under the porch light, the object gleamed. It was strapped tightly to its neck with worn-looking bands. I couldn't make out the details from the window, but it definitely wasn't just a collar. It looked like equipment, unusual for a farm dog. A puzzle within a puzzle. I didn't even grab a jacket, just opened the back door and stepped into the cool air. The porch light didn't quite reach the far edges of the yard, which were swallowed in deep shadows. The lighting made everything, the bushes, the fencing, the houses, feel slightly distorted, like I'd stepped into a loop of identical scenes. I slowly walked down the path. The gravel crunched beneath my feet, a sharp sound in the still night. The dog noticed me. Its tail wagged gently. It stayed still, watching me closely, neither running nor approaching, just waiting. I stopped a few feet away, giving it space. Up close, I could see the device around its neck more clearly. It was a camera, a bulky one, secured with an elaborate harness that didn't fit the rugged look of the dog at all. I crouched down and reached out slowly. The dog sniffed at the air, curious. Its eyes were sharp and thoughtful despite the grime. It took a few tentative steps forward. "Hey there," I murmured. Suddenly, it bared its teeth and growled low and deep. I jerked back, my heart pounding. I cursed myself for not calling animal control. Worse, I had left my phone upstairs, charging. Now I was alone in the yard with a massive dog, and I was definitely not in charge. We were locked in a standoff. I barely dared to breathe. Then I realized the dog wasn't growling at me. Its body was tense, eyes fixed on a far corner of the yard, ears pinned, focused. There was something else out there. I squinted into the shadows but saw nothing. Still, I stood frozen, pulse racing, watching the dog for any clue of what might be lurking beyond the fence. I tried to stay calm, speaking gently. "It's okay, buddy. There's nothing there. Look." I gestured toward the empty space. The dog's posture eased. Its ears lifted, tail gave a weak wag. He relaxed, but kept glancing back just in case. That corner of the fence, it somehow felt taller than it should have been. Heavier. Off. I decided it was time to bring the dog inside. I opened the back door. The dog hesitated, then climbed the steps slowly and walked past me into the house. I closed the door behind us, shutting out the night. The dog took a moment to look around. I headed to the fridge and pulled out some cold cuts, chicken. I dumped them into a bowl and set it on the floor. The dog sniffed, then ate with careful, measured hunger. As he ate, I studied the camera harness. It was complex, tight, secure, with lots of adjustable straps. I knelt and gently unbuckled it. The dog looked up at me, eyes uneasy. "It's all right," I said quietly, hoping I sounded more confident than I felt. I scratched behind his ears. He seemed to relax and return to eating. When I pulled my hand back, it was coated in some dry, crusted substance. I didn't want to guess what. I unfastened the harness and pulled it off. A few small stones fell from beneath the straps and scattered on the tile floor. The dog visibly relaxed once the harness was off, tail wagging more freely. I set the camera on the table and walked to the sink. Reaching for the dish soap, I noticed the color of the gunk on my hand. Dark red, rust-colored, blood. My stomach twisted. I scrubbed my hands fast, watching the reddish residue spiral down the drain, trying to ignore the implications. I leaned on the sink, heart racing, considering what to do next. There weren't many good options at this hour. I grabbed a pair of gloves from under the counter, and then I turned back to the camera, starting at the dog's neck where the harness had been. I parted his fur, checking for any injuries. His tail tapped the floor a few times, clearly enjoying the attention. Fortunately, I didn't find a single wound. Maybe he had rolled in something dead. Even with my limited knowledge of pets, I knew dogs liked doing odd things like that, which is probably why we weren't allowed one as kids. I grabbed an old t-shirt from the closet, one I'd meant to toss in the rag pile, soaked it in soapy water, and started scrubbing through his matted coat. Layers of reddish-brown muck came off. At least, I hoped it was just mud. After toweling him dry, I settled him on an old bath mat. Beneath all the dirt, his coat was wiry and gray, with curls along his muzzle that gave him a kind of mustache. He looked oddly at peace now, sprawled out on the floor. Then I turned my attention to the camera that had been strapped to him. It looked more like something used for wildlife field work than what you'd expect on a stray in a suburb. I recognized enough to know it was high-end gear, modified to hide its origins. Any original branding had been scratched off. Whoever set it up knew what they were doing and didn't want it traced. I brought out my backup laptop and sat at the kitchen table, trying not to focus on the late hour blinking from the corner of the screen. I wasn't tired anymore. I figured it wouldn't be a simple connection. The camera had an unfamiliar port, not matching the regular USB cables I had. After rummaging through my junk drawer, I found an old universal adapter kit. After trying a few options, I found a match and managed to connect it. A small success. I looked down at the dog, who gave the floor a casual tail thump, like a sarcastic cheer. I hooked the other end to my laptop, expecting it to fail. But after a short pause, the system picked it up. External device. Opening the storage, I found just one video file, and AVI. Fairly standard. As the file loaded, I glanced down at my new guest, curled at my feet and watching me with calm curiosity. "You're welcome," I muttered. He blinked slowly, then tapped the floor again. While the video buffered, I filled a bowl with water and set it down. He drank eagerly, splashing everywhere in the process. But I had to admit, it was endearing. Even though I was waiting for it, the sudden audio made me jump. All right, Augie, you look great. Ready to be famous? A woman's face appeared on screen. Mid-40s, freckles on her face, and a warm smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. She leaned close to the camera, close to the dog. Augie, I repeated aloud, looking at the dog. His ears perked and his tail beat the ground enthusiastically, the most animated I'd seen him. The name clearly meant something to him. In the footage, Augie barked a few times, and the woman laughed before stepping out of frame. The camera jolted as he bolted forward. The screen blurred with motion. Huge clay-colored rocks filled the frame, jagged, sunlit, against a clear blue sky. Beneath him, dry dirt and patches of grass zipped past. Suddenly the angle shifted. The view tilted wildly. There was a sound like claws scraping against stone. Then the camera showed only the narrow sliver of sky between steep rock walls. Augie had fallen into a crevice. The footage became disorienting. Chaotic movements as he wriggled, trying to get out. The camera jolted with each motion. I felt tense watching it, even knowing he was now safe beside me. I reached down to pat his head. He looked up, grateful. Rough day, huh? I said. He snorted softly, then rested his eyes. In the video, a woman's voice called from somewhere off camera. Urgent. Augie, stay calm, boy. Just stay calm. She sounded worried. A moment later, she appeared above the gap, breathing heavily, clothes soaked in sweat as she tried to reach him. Easy, Augie, she said, her arm stretching down, but not quite far enough. With a frustrated sigh, she pulled back. Her voice came through again, fainter. Ugh, no signal. Of course. Then silence. Just Augie's labored breathing and soft scratching against stone. A few minutes passed before the woman returned. This time, with purpose. Okay, sweetie. Found another way down. Stay with me, she called out as she walked into frame again, pointing to the left. Augie shifted the camera toward her voice. She disappeared off screen, but soon he was free. The harness had torn, just enough to allow him to squeeze out. Once beside her, she checked him over, her hands moving quickly through his fur. She wrapped her arms around him. Good boy, Augie, she repeated, clearly relieved. She wiped her face with the hem of her shirt, then looked around, her eyes locked on a narrow path, probably the one she had used to get down. The camera caught her expression shift from cautious to worried. Shit, she murmured. She stepped closer to the tunnel, examining the rocks. It looked unstable, with loose debris scattered across the entry point. She spent nearly an hour trying to clear the blockage, but the rocks wouldn't budge. Every attempt only loosened more dust and stones. She even tried squeezing back through the gap Augie had fallen into, but couldn't get a grip. Between efforts, she yelled for help until her voice cracked. Finally, she stopped. She knelt beside Augie, framed in the light, filtering through the rocks above. Her face was streaked with sweat and dirt. Well, Aug, she said quietly, looks like forward is our only option. Remember I said this would be an adventure. She scratched his chin, letting out a sigh. I should have paid more attention to the warning signs, she added. This one's on me, but I'll get us out. Her tone was resolute. She gave him a reassuring pat and reached for her fanny pack, pulling out a water bottle. After a sip, she poured some into her hand for Augie. I wondered what kind of signs. She meant warning about the area's instability or literal ones, like trespassing. Then she took out her phone and turned on the flashlight. The dim beam lit their path ahead, a sharp contrast to the soft, natural light behind them. As they moved deeper into the cave, the footage became more unnerving. The tight passage opened into larger chambers, but the size didn't bring relief. The flashlight seemed to vanish into the vast dark. The rock formations were confusing, walls pocked with holes, pillars formed from merged stalactites and stalagmites. Everything started to look the same. Eventually, the trail narrowed again. One stretch was especially tight. The woman had to turn sideways to fit. Her shirt tore on the rough surface, scraping her back. The sound of it was jarring. Augie hesitated, but followed with encouragement. She was clearly uneasy. Her breathing grew louder. Every few minutes she checked her phone, still with no signal. The echo of her steps and breath made the tension worse. She paused at one point and swept the light in a slow arc. The beam caught on wet, uneven rock. "Augie," she whispered, her voice sharp in the silence. "Where are we? My head is pounding. The pressure down here." Her words faded. Augie let out a small groan. They pushed forward for hours. Just once, they stopped to rest. She ate an energy bar. He crunched through a handful of dog treats. Watching the footage was exhausting and emotionally difficult. The purpose was clear. Figure out where the dog came from. And now, what happened to the woman who owned him? But I couldn't help but feel guilty when I hit fast forward. It felt like I was leaving them behind, like I should be doing something, even though I knew it wasn't happening live. I settled for stroking Augie again. He was so worn out that he barely responded. Suddenly, the footage changed. Quite literally, there was light at the end of the tunnel, bright like midday sun. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding as the camera pushed forward. Augie's head lowered as he took careful steps. "Oh, thank God, thank God," the woman said. She crouched, wrapping her arms around Augie's neck, her hair falling over the lens. Mud streaks and tears marked her face. The tunnel ended in a jagged break in the cave wall, a hole awkwardly cut into the rock. The woman stepped forward, cautiously, outlined by the intense light pouring through. She measured the opening with her hands and began crawling through, whistling for Augie to follow. He hesitated, hovering in the cave's shadow, before finally stepping into the brightness. The screen flared white as the tunnel filled with a nearly blinding light that seemed almost unnatural. Once the camera adjusted, the image became clearer. It was a room. Augie's camera, bumping with every step, revealed smooth concrete walls and high ceilings, supported by thick beams. It was stark, functional, and clearly man-made, jarringly different from the cave's wild interior. Shelves lined the walls, bottled water, folded blankets, and white boxes marked with red crosses. Medical kits, most likely. The truth hit me gradually. Even with all the clues, they had stumbled into some kind of bunker. As Augie followed the woman deeper inside, scanning the space as she cautiously explored, the camera caught the wall they'd entered through. Beyond the cracked stone, stalagmites were still visible. It looked like something had burrowed into, or out of, the rock. Near the hole was a heap of wires and scattered electronics. Augie moved on too quickly for a clear view, and pausing the video didn't help. Then came a sudden clicking sound. The woman turned to it. Augie did too. and there was a shotgun pointed at them. My stomach dropped. The woman gasped and raised her hands. Augie instinctively backed up a step, growling softly. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. We've been wandering for hours, maybe more than a day. We're not here to cause trouble, she said. The shotgun was held by another woman, tall, alarmingly thin, with long, unkempt blonde hair. She wore a worn-out sweatsuit and gripped the weapon with unsteady hands, unsure whether to aim at Augie or his owner. Mom, a voice called from off-camera. There was a rustling noise. Stay there, Kyle. Stay with Corey and your dad. Please, Augie's owner begged. We just need help. Maybe I have signal now, if I can just... A young boy peeked around a corner, blonde-haired and just as frail as the woman holding the gun. Please, I just need you to call 911, or if you let me try my phone. She started, but the mother and son stared at her in silence. Augie turned his head back and forth, following the tense exchange. Come on, the woman with the gun said, motioning with the barrel. If that dog attacks, you both go down. He won't. Augie's trained. He's a good boy. And she began. No names, the woman snapped. Her tone was flat and final. My fists clenched. That wasn't a good sign. She had already named her son. She didn't want to humanize the stranger. I wondered if the woman realized how dangerous that was. Augie's nails clicked on the floor as he followed. He paused to glance at the boy, who watched him like he was some rare animal. The camera shook as Augie trailed behind his owner. Her dirty hands were still raised above her head as they walked deeper into the bunker. They entered a narrow hallway, lined with exposed pipes and flickering fluorescent lights. It opened into a larger room. At the far end, a couch had been turned into a makeshift bed, and a man lay there, hooked to an IV. His face was pale and sunken. Beside him, a boy, Corey presumably, sat quietly in a chair. His hair was as unwashed as the others, his body equally thin. Sit, the blonde woman ordered. Augie obeyed. So did his owner, settling into a beat-up folding chair. The boy sat next to Corey, forming a loose semicircle around the couch. The woman never lowered her weapon. Augie looked around slowly. The space resembled a converted living room, though the stark concrete made it feel more like a field hospital. The tension was thick. No one moved. We used to have a dog, Kyle said suddenly, still staring at Augie. Quiet, his mother responded. Then, after a pause, when did you come from? You mean, where? Augie's owner asked. No, she said. When? I don't understand. Just answer. It's 2024, she said cautiously. The woman's expression fell. She mouthed the numbers. But one of the boys started. He stood and Augie turned toward him, camera shifting to capture the kids. Don't, Kyle. Dad said this might happen. Corey said, eyes on the man on the couch. I said no, their mother snapped, but her voice was weary. But he said, we don't know that. She could be lying. I'm not, Augie's owner said, quickly. What year do you think it is? It's, the boy began. Stop, their mother interrupted. Why? Kyle asked, whining now. Because I said so. But it's both of you. Leave. Now. To the beds. There was movement as the boys obeyed. The woman took a seat by the man. The silence stretched. Only Augie's breathing broke the Quiet. There's a war, the blonde woman said suddenly. I'm sorry, Augie's owner replied. No answer came. What kind of war? Is that why you're here? Hiding from a bomb? The woman gave a sharp, bitter laugh. A bomb? God, no, I wish that was all. She wiped her nose. They tore it open, she added softly. Tore what open? Everything. Existence itself. What? I'm not trying to cause problems. If you'll just show me the way out, or even just let us go back to the caves. They're trying to fix it. The scientists left, at least. My husband was one of them. He came back, said there's no fix, only an exit. You mean the cave? We can all go. It's not easy, but I can take you. She didn't respond. Instead, she leaned over to kiss her husband's forehead. As she moved, her hair shifted, exposing her neck. It looked like something from an autopsy. Bruises lined her spine, and in the center her skin was blackened and oozing. Bone showed where the tissue had broken down. Blood and fluid stained her clothes. We can't go, she said quietly, still leaning over the man. Augie's owner must have seen it too. Her voice shook as she spoke. Okay, I get it. But what if we just leave? Just me and my dog? She shifted slightly. Please. Were you one of the ones he spoke to? Did you know? The blonde woman asked. What? No. I don't even know what that means. He said he made contact before it all went wrong. She exhaled shakily. It doesn't matter anymore. They're going to destroy it all. Said it's not worth saving. I don't understand. Please. She stopped as the shotgun clicked. Augie growled softly, sensing the danger. What's the camera for? What? The one on the dog, the big one. Right there. She hesitated. I forgot it was even on. I just bought it online. For fun. Sure, the woman said, full of disbelief. Suddenly there was movement. Both the woman and the dog looked toward the man on the couch. Mike, the blonde woman said softly, placing a hand on his head. Honey, another faint rustle. She began to cry. Oh no. Oh, Mike, no. The man trembled like he was convulsing. Then a deep red stain spread through the sheet covering him. His body started to rise, though his head didn't move, just shook slightly, as if controlled by strings. The sheet continued to lift, oddly reminiscent of a Halloween costume. The blonde woman jumped up, knocking over her chair with a loud bang. She pointed the shotgun at the rising sheet, her hands shaking. Mom, one of the boys called from another room. Stay back, she shouted. Then the sheet dropped. For just a moment, something else was there. A long, warped figure with bony limbs, coated in blood and tissue. It seemed to stretch open, as though the man's body had just been a shell. Its face appeared out of nowhere, large, smooth like a skull, wet and gray, as if pulled from the sea. Its legs moved awkwardly, like it had just been born, still partly attached to loose, rubbery flesh. The blonde woman sobbed uncontrollably. The shotgun slipped from her grip and clattered to the floor. She dropped to the ground, trying to grab it. The man's empty skin collapsed as the final parts of the thing ripped free, and then, just like that, it vanished. I rewound the video to double-check, pausing it. Augie's head was moving back and forth in the chaos. Still, the footage confirmed it. One moment it was there, the next, gone. That's when real panic set in. The blonde woman spun in circles, the gun swinging wildly in her hands. The overhead lights flickered. Augie's owner seized the chance. She jumped up, grabbed his harness, and pulled him toward the exit. Augie growled low, the sound so strong the camera shook. He hesitated, but then followed. They raced toward the hallway. The two boys were there, wide-eyed with fear. She ran past them, dragging Augie along, back to the storeroom. The opening in the wall looked smaller now, as if it was closing in. She ran to it. Augie paused at the door, growling down the hallway behind them. The lights flicked off. Total darkness. "Come on, Augie," the woman whispered. He kept staring into the dark. Silence. Then, terrifying screams. The camera jolted as the woman yanked his harness, dragging him through the crack. In a blur of limbs, they made it through. For several long minutes, the footage was just bright light and heavy breathing. Then her face appeared close to the lens, tense, eyes red and swollen. She held the flashlight under her chin, trembling. "I'm sorry, Augie," she said, reaching out to touch him. Her voice carried guilt and fear. There was a faint scraping noise, a rock falling in the distance. Augie turned toward it. Then, a scream. Something heavy hit the ground. The camera focused again. She was on her stomach, clawing at the dirt, her phone still in one hand, its light bouncing around. She dug in with her fingers so forcefully, a nail tore off, blood leaking out. But something was pulling her, again and again. The crack in the wall was somehow shrinking, collapsing on itself. One last tug on her legs, and she vanished. Only her torn, bloody nails clung to the edges. Then they too were gone. Augie stared at the sealed wall, confused. He whined and scratched at where the crack had been. The wall suddenly shook. Augie jumped back, startled. It shook again. Something was pounding on it. Augie turned and bolted, navigating through the cave system. He ran wildly, as though the tunnels were pressing in on him, just like the closing wall, after what felt like forever. Though it was only about an hour, he found a small break in the rock. He stepped through, but it wasn't the canyon where the footage began. It was a cluttered, dim space. It took me a second to recognize it. Augie's head darted around the room, searching. My breath caught. It was my basement. He climbed a stack of boxes and pushed through the small window, squeezing through with effort, twisting his body to get out. Moments later, he was in my backyard, panting hard. The last clip on the footage was of me, standing in the back doorway in my pajamas. I don't know how long I sat there, watching the dark screen, trying to make sense of everything. But when I snapped out of it, I ran, slipping on the kitchen floor, yanking open the basement door, flipping the switch, sprinting down the stairs. Augie woke up and followed, nails tapping the floor behind me. I passed boxes and old junk I'd meant to toss for years. Then I saw it, a crack in the basement wall, one that hadn't been there before. It was small, not nearly large enough for a dog like Augie to get through, but the ground around it was covered in churned-up, rust-colored soil. I remembered the footage, the woman's hands vanishing behind the rock. Behind me, Augie growled. "So, yeah, we left. Fast. And I still keep a chair propped against that basement door. Not that it would really stop anything, I haven't decided what to do with the video. I'm still thinking it over. I started looking through news and social media for any missing woman with a dog, but then I widened my search because I wasn't even sure it had happened here in Colorado. At one point, I thought maybe it was a film, a student project recorded before I bought the place. The basement was full of stuff when I moved in. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe someone dropped Doggy over the fence. Then an even stranger thought crossed my mind. Hear me out. It might not even have happened in our reality. If what happened in those caves was real, maybe they weren't from here at all. On one hand, it felt incredibly real, the way the footage played continuously, the way Augie looked when he showed up, the crack in my wall. On the other hand, well, it makes no sense. Still, I care about Augie. He's a great dog. He fit right into my life. Goes on runs, with me, keeps me company, has his own personality. I'm not about to post flyers. I don't even know who would be looking. A film student, the government, whoever actually knows what this was. He has these episodes, that's what I call them. Moments when he stares into a dark corner, or into the trees, hair standing up, growling. Maybe he's remembering. Or maybe, like people say, animals do see what we can't. I think about that thing that disappeared, about the woman's worn-out face. They tore it open. I always give Augie a few extra head pats, more treats, maybe to comfort him, or maybe to say, good job. One thing I do know for sure, I'm not living alone anymore. I have a Christmas tree that won't die growing up. My sister Sarah always insisted on having a real Christmas tree every year, even when our family finances were practically non-existent. She would go above and beyond to make the holidays joyful, even as a teenager, handcrafting decorations and saving money from mowing lawns all year, just so she could bake trays of gingerbread cookies in December. My fondest childhood memories smell of pine and sparkle with tinsel, filled with my grandmother's off-key carols, my sister's laughter, and the gentle crackle of a warm fire. But the Christmas I turned 11 was different. Our grandmother passed away just weeks before the holiday. Sarah and I were devastated. Graham had been the anchor in our lives, and losing her made us feel completely lost. At 19, Sarah was still barely an adult, but she was determined to keep me from entering the foster care system she'd once been trapped in. When I was born, she'd spent years bouncing between homes, until Graham finally secured custody of us both. Sarah rarely spoke about that time, but I never doubted her fierce love for me. I knew without question that she would do anything to keep us together. Sarah had always been a bit of a rebel, and Graham often struggled to rein her in. One major point of tension had been Sarah's boyfriend, Mark. Graham strongly disapproved. He was 10 years older and had a nasty temper. She warned Sarah repeatedly to end the relationship. It wasn't until years later that Sarah explained more. Our biological father had been a man like Mark. He had dragged our mother into a downward spiral of addiction and chaos before she even finished high school. Both of them died of overdoses within a year of each other when I was still an infant. Graham lived in constant fear that Sarah or I might follow the same path. If possible, I disliked Mark even more than Graham had. It was the kind of instant, deep dislike children can feel, raw and instinctual. I resented how much of Sarah's attention he took, hated his stale smell of smoke and cologne, and most of all, I hated hearing my sister cry after talking to him. I truly believe that if Graham had lived, Sarah would have left Mark. When Graham got sick, he was unsupportive and cruel, constantly complaining about how much time Sarah spent caring for her and me. After Graham's passing, the financial burden of her medical bills forced us out of our home. We ended up all living in a one-bedroom apartment, Sarah, Mark, and me. My room was a couch in the living room, sectioned off by sheets strung on a clothesline. Sarah hunted for a second job while avoiding visits from social services, trying to keep us afloat. Every night I rolled tiny tissue balls for earplugs to block out their arguments. Through the paper-thin walls, I'd hear him rage about how he never agreed to take care of a damn kid, especially not two. So when Sarah brought home a Christmas tree, I wasn't thrilled. We barely had space, and money was tight. Mark had doubled Sarah's share of the rent because of me, and she didn't have anything left for extras. She'd begged him to ease up in December, just so she could afford to decorate a bit, but he insisted she cover all her expenses alone, including holiday costs. One night after a few beers, Mark suggested we cut down a tree from the nearby state park. Sarah hesitated, knowing it was illegal and risky, and I saw the fear in her eyes as she glanced at his dwindling six-pack. He dismissed her concerns, and despite the late hour, we bundled into his old Buick. I was still in pajamas, with a coat hastily thrown on over them. That cold December night is etched in my memory. The frost crunched beneath our boots, and I was terrified we'd get caught by a ranger or police officer. My nose wouldn't stop running, and my sniffles irritated Mark, who snapped at me constantly. Living with him, I had learned he resented me as much as I disliked him. Worse, he watched me too closely. His attention made my skin crawl. I wanted to tell Sarah, but didn't know how, and I feared what he'd do if he found out how I felt. There was something unsettling about seeing him in the dark, wielding a saw. I clung tightly to Sarah's hand, not wanting to let go. She held on just as firmly, and I suspected she was just as uneasy as I was, especially with his drunk laughter echoing through the trees. We ventured deep into the woods, far from view. The trees closed in tighter the farther we walked, almost as if they wanted to warn us off. "How about this one?" Sarah asked more than once, her voice tinged with pleading. Each time, Mark shook his head, seemingly using the moment to punish her for asking. She gripped a branch, casting me an anxious glance. Eventually, the moon rose high, casting a silvery glow. I was exhausted, nearly asleep on my feet, when Mark finally called out, "Here it is." He took a swig from his flask, flushed and wild-eyed. "It's a little tall for the apartment," Sarah said gently, pressing her mittens to her cold cheeks. We stood in a clearing. The tree Mark had chosen was undeniably beautiful, tall, symmetrical, and dusted in frost that sparkled like gold in the flashlight beam. It stood over a foot taller than him. I tried to imagine it crammed into our tiny living room. "What do you think?" he asked, staring directly at me. The saw caught the moonlight, glinting ominously. I swallowed hard and looked to Sarah. Seeing the tension in my face, she answered for me. "We'll make it work. Thank you, Mark." She reached for my hand again. Satisfied, he knelt down and started sawing. I'd never seen a tree being cut down. Our past Christmas trees were always pre-cut and netted. Watching it happen felt wrong, like when I first learned chicken fingers came from real chickens. "Do trees know when they're being cut?" I asked, staring at the forest around us. The trees seemed to be silently witnessing the scene. "That's the dumbest thing I've heard in a while," Mark muttered. The screech of the saw cut through the silence. Sarah knelt beside me and met my gaze. "No, sweetie, they don't feel it," she said softly, adjusting my hat with a playful face to make me smile. I did, and hugged her. She squeezed me back, tightly. Over her shoulder I watched Mark work, sweat glistening on his brow. Suddenly something dropped from above, hitting his shoulder and startling him. He raised an arm in defense, and the saw blade jerked dangerously close to his neck. I screamed, certain it would cut him. Sarah spun around. Mark stared at the tree, the saw lodged mid-trunk. She rushed over to him, alarmed by how close it had come. The object that hit him was just a pine cone. It rolled to my feet. I picked it up and slipped it into my pocket without thinking, like it might get me in trouble. What the hell just happened? Sarah scanned the trees nervously, her eyes landing on me. My hand slipped. "It's nothing," Mark said, his voice shaking despite his efforts to sound calm. He got up quickly, taking another swig from his flask. "Maybe we should go home," Sarah suggested softly. "No, we came all this way. We're taking in the damn tree," he snapped. Then he dropped back down, sawing harder than ever, as if to punish the tree. Sarah pulled me aside, out of the way. Mark gave the trunk a final kick, and with a loud crack like a gunshot, the tree crashed down. The ground seemed to tremble with the impact. Mark stood over it, breathless, like he'd just won a fight. "All right," Mark finally said. "Come help me carry it." He grabbed the trunk's base, Sarah took the front, and I moved to the middle, reluctantly. Even at 11, I understood the uneasy sense that we were doing something wrong, like dragging something we shouldn't be touching. The tree was heavy, and I could barely see where I was going. I stumbled and almost face-planted. Mark cursed and adjusted to the shifting weight. "Pay attention," he snapped, his face flushed and sweaty. My arms ached, but I was more afraid of what he'd say or do if I dropped it again. I looked to Sarah, but she was focused ahead, flashlight steady in her hand. Suddenly, I felt something wrap around my wrists. I nearly let go in surprise, but a glance at Mark kept me still. The feeling was like snug rubber bands, not painful, but strange. Oddly enough, it made keeping up with them easier. By the time we reached the car, I was so relieved I nearly cried. The sensation around my wrists faded as I let go, and I hurried into the back seat, wrapping my arms around myself. Outside, I heard Mark and Sarah struggling to secure the tree to the car roof. The sound of metal against metal grating, like we were being sealed into a can. The ride home was silent and tense. Everyone was wiped out, and the hardest part, getting the tree inside, was still ahead. I fought sleep as we drove through the dark. Sarah gently woke me once we got there, with the apartment building looming behind her. The place felt like an old, drafty ship. Dim lights, cramped halls, no elevator, and far too many stairs. As we lined up again to carry the tree, standing in the cold entryway, I had a bizarre thought that we'd somehow brought part of the forest with us, or maybe never left it. As we climbed the stairs, that strange prickling sensation returned on my wrists. I could now see Sarah's face more clearly. The tight lines and furrowed brow said she was as tired and stressed as I felt. I didn't dare glance back at Mark. Inside, Sarah immediately pulled out the tree stand and measured the trunk. Her Earlier concern returned to her face. "It's going to be a tight fit," she said, clearly worried. Mark, already in the kitchen cracking open a beer, slammed it on the counter and snatched the stand from her. The tree was laid across the worn carpet, taking up almost the whole room. Mark dropped to his knees and started forcing the trunk into the stand, using only his hands and frustration. Sarah came and sat beside me on the couch, my bed, wrapping me in my favorite blanket, one of the few things I had from Graham. She hugged me tightly and kissed my head, while Mark grumbled and cursed. "There," he finally said, breathing heavily. He had forced the tree into the metal ring, though both the wood and stand were visibly damaged, splinters and needles scattered everywhere. He lifted the tree, and the top bent awkwardly against the ceiling. It filled the room. He looked at us, then gripped the trunk and gave it a shake like a trophy. Then his face twisted in pain, and he cursed again, pulling his hand back quickly. Blood streamed from between his fingers. He clutched his hand to his chest, face pale and shaken. Sarah hesitated, clearly reluctant, but stood and went to help. "Something in there bit me," he said, staring at me as if I had something to do with it. I remembered the strange feeling around my wrists and nervously rubbed my hands together, unsure what was real. Sarah gently shook a branch, clearly not convinced. "You probably cut yourself on a splinter or when we were carrying it," she said, trying to calm him. Mark looked at the two of us, then let her guide him toward the bathroom, no longer arguing. I was left alone with the tree. From the hallway I heard Sarah's soft voice and Mark's angry complaints. I stared at the tree until my eyes grew too heavy, still feeling like I hadn't truly left the woods. I slept restlessly, dreaming of that moment when the saw nearly hit Mark. But in the dream, dark, twisted limbs like charred branches held the blade to his throat, and thick, sap-like blood dripped down. In the shadows around the clearing, more dark shapes crept in. I woke up with a jolt, feeling pressure around my ankles. I was still upright on the couch, coat on, blanket in hand. The tree filled my view, and for a second, I wondered if I had ever left the forest at all. "Come get your Pop-Tarts," Sarah called gently. I felt a rush of relief. I carefully walked past the tree to the kitchen, where she handed me breakfast, wrapped in a paper towel. She looked worn out, hair in a messy bun, still in sweatpants. But her smile was warm. "Mark's still sleeping, and we missed your bus, so we'll borrow the car to get you to school. Can you get ready quick?" I nodded, mouth full of strawberry, filling, and rushed to change. As she drove, Sarah seemed thoughtful. "Do you like living with me and Mark?" she asked out of nowhere. I turned to the window, watching my breath fog the glass. "I like living with you," I answered carefully, choosing my words with more maturity than most 11-year-olds should need. She seemed to know what I meant. I saw her knuckles tighten on the steering wheel. The rest of the ride passed in silence. "I can't wait to decorate the tree with you tonight," she said as we pulled up. She gave me a hug. "Me too." In truth, I didn't want to touch the tree again, but I hoped my smile looked convincing. That week was hard. School before Christmas always reminded me how little we had. Graham used to just scrape by, and my gift list was always short. This year, I didn't write anything down. I didn't want Sarah to feel bad. Instead, I drew the forest from my dream when the teacher passed out paper. I focused on the tree, hoping it would help me stay grounded. When I got off the bus, I knew something was wrong. Sarah always met me, using her short break between diner shifts, but not today. I walked home alone, stepping over the dry pine needles we had left behind, anxiety growing with every step. The tree was the first thing I saw when I opened the door. A single strand of lights hung from it, the rest tangled on the floor. Sarah sat on the couch, still in pajamas, holding a bag of frozen peas to her chin. She waved when she saw me, but her expression was heavy. I looked back at the tree, wondering if its strange pull had affected her too. "Ready to decorate?" she asked through the bag. I dropped my backpack and coat beside the couch. She met my eyes, sighed, and slowly pulled the ice pack away. Her chin was bruised, and dried blood ringed her mouth. I stared, questions racing through my head. "Tripped while taking out the ornaments," she said softly. A delicate paper snowflake sat in her lap. She smoothed it out and handed it to me. "Where should this one go?" she asked, changing the subject. I took the snowflake and, unsure what else to do, placed it on the wall. We did that a few more times. The air slowly lightened. She put on Christmas music, though she didn't sing like usual. Her mouth clearly hurt too much. I was hesitant to touch the tree at first, but soon settled into the routine. I told myself I was being silly. I wanted to ask Sarah what really happened, but she seemed fragile, like the glass ornaments we hung. When I finished decorating the lower half, she lifted me up to reach higher. We both burst into laughter. Then I paused. A branch seemed to bend toward me, as if inviting me to hang something there. The door burst open with a gust of cold air. Mark stepped inside, smelling of booze, smoke, and the outdoors. He had a wide, too bright smile on his face. "Wow, this place looks great," he said, cheerful and loud. Sarah flinched as he approached. He kissed her roughly, ignoring the dark bruise on her chin. Mark circled the tree slowly, his voice full of self-assurance. "Told you this was the right tree." I didn't say anything, but inside I thought it looked out of place in our small apartment. The top bent awkwardly, as if it were something wild we were struggling to tame. "Looks like you still need help with the lights. Can you pass them to me?" Mark directed his attention toward me, his gaze making me uneasy. I glanced down at the tangled wires, picked up a strand, and handed it to him. He took it, then looked at Sarah, his tone sharp. "See, that's how you ask for something, Sarah. You don't just take it. I pay for the gas and insurance, Mark. And you were asleep," Sarah muttered under her breath, barely audible. Mark shot her a look so cold it sent a shiver through me as he reached for another strand of lights. His hand was bandaged, blood soaking through the cloth. I remembered his earlier accusation about something in the tree. I handed him the lights, a growing urge to flee the apartment washing over me. Mark suddenly jerked back, dropping the lights. He rushed to the bathroom, the sound of water running in the sink. It felt like a repeat of the night before, but this time, Sarah didn't follow him. "How old are those damn lights? I think they shocked me," Mark shouted from the bathroom. Sarah didn't respond. She just stared at me, her hand lightly touching her bruised chin. The night blurred by. I was old enough to piece together some of what was happening, but still too young to know what to do about it. I was angry at how casually Mark could hurt Sarah, and then retreat into the bedroom, ignoring the dinner she made. The small apartment felt suffocating, the tension so thick I could almost taste it. No one mentioned finishing the tree decorations. It was like we were trapped in a cage, surrounded by Christmas cheer that only made the air heavier. After dinner, as usual, Sarah sat with me to help with my homework. I couldn't bring myself to look at her bruised face, but she tucked me in as always. Even though I was exhausted from the night before, sleep came quickly. In my dream, the apartment transformed into an endless forest of pine trees. Roots twisted around the carpet, branches burst through the ceiling. Strings of lights snaked through the shadows, and the Christmas tree we had decorated earlier stood at the center. But it was different now. It was radiant, glowing like a star, covered in layers of lights and ornaments, glass baubles, tinsel, wooden carvings, paper flowers, candy canes, and bells decorated the tree in a chaotic, beautiful pattern. It felt like 1,000 Christmases happening at once. The air vibrated with energy, and the room seemed to breathe with the tree. In the dark corners, a void began to form, slowly taking shape as it absorbed the light around it. Like a black hole, it was featureless, yet there was something unsettlingly aware in its movements. It paused, almost as if it had sensed me watching, and that feeling of recognition filled the air. The void leaned forward, its long, finger-like appendages stretching towards me. My hand lifted on its own, reaching out to meet the curling tendrils. Suddenly, I woke up with a gasp, my mouth covered. "Honey, it's me," Sarah's soft voice whispered. My chest was tight, my body caught between dream and reality. "Shh, we need to be quiet," she urged, her voice laced with urgency. I looked up and saw her kneeling beside me, wearing her coat. The room was dim, lit only by the tree's few strands of lights. "We're leaving tonight," she whispered, brushing my hair gently. "One of the girls at work found us a safe place to stay, just the two of us. But Mark can't know." She motioned to my backpack beside her. "I've already packed half of our things downstairs. I just need you to grab your homework and anything else you have out here. I have a taxi waiting, and I need to let the driver know we're coming. I'll be right back, okay?" She helped me into my winter coat. I nodded, my heart racing with a mix of fear and relief. Sarah looked concerned, her lips tight from the bruise, but she had to make sure the taxi wouldn't leave. "Can you be quick and quiet?" she urged. I nodded, trying to focus on the task at hand. She kissed the top of my head before quietly slipping out the door. I started packing my things, feeling the weight of the situation. My hands trembled in the dark as I packed my homework, clothes, and then my blanket. As I scanned the room, I realized I'd forgotten something important. I pulled the blanket out and laid it down, knowing Sarah's Christmas decorations were more important. I quickly gathered them, handmade ornaments, paper snowflakes, and a ceramic bauble that played "Oh Christmas Tree" when shaken. My hands shook as the tune echoed eerily in the dark. Suddenly, I felt something watching me. I turned, my heart sinking when I saw a tall, shadowy figure in the doorway. At first, I thought it was the creature from my dream, but as the lights flickered, I recognized Mark. He was holding the tree saw, his eyes empty black pits. He stepped closer and I froze. My heart raced, panic rising in my chest. Mark moved forward again, and that's when the tree's dark branches twisted and formed into jagged, tentacle-like appendages. They wrapped around Mark, lifting him off the ground. His screams filled the room as the tree pulled him closer, his skin melting away as he was engulfed in the tree's twisted embrace. the room filled with the smell of burning metal and smoke, the fire spreading up his body. His screams became quieter as the flames reached his face, and the entire tree burned, roaring like a bonfire. The heat hit me even from across the room. I felt a sharp tug at my shoulder and I screamed, instinctively fighting back. My eyes stung with smoke, but the room was filled with light. I recognized Sarah, her arms pulling me into a frantic embrace. She sprinted through the front door, carrying me down the stairs into the cold night air. Over her shoulder, I saw one of the tree's tentacles rise above the flames, almost like it was waving goodbye. We huddled together in the back of the taxi, smelling of soot and tearfully clinging to each other. The taxi driver had seen the explosion of flames from the apartment window and immediately called 911. The three of us waited for the fire department as the fire alarm blared, while the other tenants slowly emerged from the building, confused and groggy. Sarah stroked the back of my hair, speaking softly about how our life would be so much better at our new place. She reassured me that things would be easier from here on out, and told me not to dwell on what I had witnessed. But I couldn't forget. The image of what I'd seen was burned into my mind. I tried to explain the creature I had seen to Sarah, as well as to the police officers and fire marshals who spoke to me with kind words throughout the week. But all I received were pitying looks and a few sympathetic hugs. They concluded that the fire and Mark's death had been caused by faulty wiring in the Christmas lights. His apartment had been the only one affected, burned almost entirely down to the steel beams, leaving a nearly perfect square in the middle of the old building. Sarah had been right in the taxi. Our lives did improve in the months that followed. She and I moved into a small, cozy townhouse, funded by a local nonprofit for survivors of domestic violence. They helped us through that winter and the years that followed. I received more gifts that Christmas than I ever had before. Later that year, in the spring, I went on a scout's trip to the same park where we had taken the tree. One night while the other campers slept, I sneaked away from the tents and hiked for hours until I found the clearing where the tree had stood. I had forgotten about the pine cone in my coat pocket until after Sarah and I got to the hotel following the fire. When I realized what it was, I kept it safe, feeling it was something important. I planted it next to the tree stump in that clearing, burying it along with the drawing I had made of the forest. I marked the spot with a rock I had painted, reading, "Thank you," decorated with hearts and stars. The years passed, and I got caught up in being a teenager, but I remembered the tree again when I got my first car in college. That summer I drove back to the forest, more for closure than any real expectation of finding it grown. When I arrived, the tree had flourished. It was a vibrant green with a thick canopy of needles, standing taller than my waist. I picked a small bouquet of wildflowers and placed them at its base, leaving with a smile. After that summer, I made it a habit to visit the tree whenever I could. It became a calming ritual. I noticed other hikers, possibly inspired by the small altar I had created, had left their own offerings, painted stones, notes, and small trinkets. Every year, we still make a trip to the forest to visit the tree. My family considers it a unique holiday tradition to have an outdoor Christmas tree. Sarah brings her family too, though I think it's more to support me than because she believes in what I saw. I'm not sure. We've never talked about it openly. However, I do know we switched to a plastic tree every year after Mark's death, and she has never had a real tree in her house since then. Each Christmas, we spend the whole day decorating. We still have everything I saved from that night, though some of the more delicate items are in storage. Sarah also has her own Etsy store now, so we have a steady supply of beautiful handmade ornaments. We sing carols, drink cocoa, and the kids play tag and build snowmen. The tree continues to grow strong and healthy, and soon we'll probably need a professional ladder to reach the top. I'm not sure if whatever watched over me that night lives in the new tree. I haven't dreamed about it since, though I've noticed that the shadows around the tree never seem to settle as evenly as they should. I like to think that it does. I enjoy watching it stand tall and quiet in the winter air, surrounded by the other trees. I wonder if I was the first to leave offerings at its trunk, or if I was simply the most recent in a long line of people who came before me. I wonder if it stretches its roots wide, searching for evil things to consume. Watching the tree grow alongside my children and my sister's children brings me so much joy. It marks the years with happy memories, and I like to think that we make it happy, too.